Well, good morning and welcome to the Symposium on Wyoming's Energy Future. This symposium is co-sponsored by the Wold Foundation and by the School of Energy Resources. I'm John Kazuba. I am the John and Jane Wold Centennial Chair in Energy, and I'm also an SER, School of Energy Resources Professor of Geology and Geophysics. Serving as the Wold Energy Chair is a privilege, and with privilege comes responsibility. And one of those responsibilities is co-organizing this symposium, which we started planning in broad brush strokes almost a year ago, and it's great to see it come to fruition. This endowed chair has provided me with many opportunities. One is to pursue some high risk, high reward research, and also it provides resources that empower my students, and I'm grateful for both aspects. My research addresses how rocks and fluids are wide: water, oil, gas, carbon dioxide, looking at hydrogen, how all those interact with each other in this deep subsurface. And we're talking about energy systems that vary widely as well: petroleum, carbon storage, and geothermal, for example. Today's symposium is highlighted by 4 panels that address important energy resources for Wyoming. We could have done a dozen panels, but we chose 4 that we thought were topical and simultaneously important for this point in time. And those subjects are nuclear, oil and gas, rare earth elements, which are needed for all manner of renewable energy and for our modern technology, and of course, coal. We are also honored to have the keynote address delivered by Governor Mark Gordon. Each panel is composed of a moderator and several panelists. And broadly speaking, the panelists represent industry, research, and policy. And we took this approach because we wanted to assure a diversity of opinion. Diversity of opinion and perspective is what is needed to solve these societally relevant problems. And also our goal is, by doing it this way, we model an approach that we hope our students will embrace as they become professionals. Speaking of students, we have approximately 60 students in attendance today, and I encourage you students to network with one or more of the many professionals we have in this audience. I also encourage our other attendees, professionals from all manner of society, to engage with the students. We also have students who are presenting research in posters that are being set up around the room. I encourage you to take a look at those. As a side note, we are not broadcasting live. We decided that wouldn't work as well as doing it live and then recording each of the panels. So if you're interested in a recording of one or more of the panels, and you want to be notified when they're posted, please email Christine Reed. Her email is on the symposium website. We have 250 attendees today. And as I said, 60 students, or almost 25%. And the students represent a broad range of departments: geology, geophysics, petroleum engineering, civil engineering, several other engineering departments, the history department, the law college, and several other departments. And we're really, really appreciative of that diversity. And I think it shows the interest that the broad student population has in these topics. We've got a diverse audience in other ways. We have 33% of the attendees are from industry, 15% from academia, not students, but deans, faculty members, vice presidents, and the like. 12% of the attendees are from government, and that's state, federal, and international. 9% from nonprofits, NGOs. 6% from law firms, lawyers, and we have several reporters who will be attending today. So actually, that sort of diversity can be hard to come by, and we're really excited to have everybody here. So at breaks or afterwards at the reception, if you were to let me know why you came, what attracted you, or you can let any of the other organizers know, we'll be sure to take note, because we want to duplicate this in the future. It serves us well and serves you well. I'd like to thank the Wold Foundation and the Wold family for their generosity and vision in funding the endowed chair that I have a privilege of holding. I'd like to thank the moderators and panelists for their time and energy in serving on today's panel. And you're going to see today, but what you won't see is all the effort behind the scenes they've put in over the past few weeks, and especially last week as we prepared for this. So thank you to the panelists and moderators. I'd like to thank my students, both past and present. That's their hard work and dedication that energize me, and frankly, they make me look good. Actually, you'll see several students running around delivering questions that you might write down at your table, delivering them to Dr. Holly Krutka during the various panels. Those are my students. They volunteered to take that task. Thank you, Emily, Victoria, Isaac, Ellen, and Sophie for all you do and for helping today. I have 3 former students here today, which I really enjoy the relationships I hold with them as they move forward. And I think they're a nice example of the kinds of successes that we have at the University of Wyoming. Thank you for coming, Olivia Terry, who works for ConocoPhillips. Derek Caro is traveling today, and he might be here towards the end. He works for Ormat in the geothermal industry. And Garrett Gay will join us today. He works on the East Coast for a nanotech firm. All of them I'm very proud of. Special thanks go to Christine Reed for her superhuman efforts in putting this together. Wouldn't work without her. You met her when you came in, is helping at the registration table, and you'll likely recognize her because I think she's running around with a camera today. So thank you, Christine. I'm about to turn the podium over to Dr. Holly Krutka, the Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources. I lead this off and I'm getting a lot of the credit, but besides Christine helping to make this thing go, Holly also has many thanks for her hard work to make this a success. What you also may not see over the course of time as Holly's been here is her dedication to the School of Energy Resources and to the state of Wyoming. Her every action as executive director to serve the state of Wyoming is nothing short of inspiring. So thank you, Holly. With that, please join me in welcoming my colleague and friend, Dr. Holly Krutka.
Okay, wow. So we can all go home now because I think I'm done for the day. That was wonderful. Just kidding. We didn't have such great speakers. So thank you all so much for being here. We're really honored to put on this conference on Wyoming's energy future. And as you all know, you're here today because Wyoming is an energy state. We export well over 90% of the energy we produce, and our economy and our way of life are dependent on that. And we all know we face serious challenges in Wyoming to continue being a major energy producer and exporter. But the School of Energy Resources was formed to address those challenges with our partners and support the Wyoming energy sector. Our partners across the state include the Wyoming Energy Authority, Wyoming State Geologic Survey, the Wyoming Business Council, Department of Environmental Quality, Governor Gordon's office, the Wyoming legislature, and more. And together, we work together to support the state's energy sector. SCR was cited at the University of Wyoming, the state's only 4-year research institution, to use the brilliant minds here at the university to focus on Wyoming's greatest energy issues. We have state-of-the-art oil and gas research, including air quality and produced water management. We're working with our collaborators across the state, including industry, to deploy carbon capture, use, and storage. We have a robust program focused on new uses for Wyoming coal that just broke ground for a demonstration facility in Campbell County. And we're grateful for our collaborators in that as well. So WRI among many others. We have a coal char brick house on campus. So if you're leaving this facility, if you get a chance, drive down 22nd Street, north on 22nd Street. And if you look to the right, you'll see two houses. One of those is produced using coal-derived char bricks. We also train students. So as John mentioned, we have lots of students involved in this conference. We have students that we train in our research program. And again, I'd encourage you to look at all the posters around the room and talk to some of those students doing really cutting edge research on Wyoming energy issues. We have a competition for those students here today. We also have at the School of Energy Resources an undergraduate program called Energy Resource Management and Development, and it has two concentrations. One is land management and the other is energy and environmental systems. And that student group is great to work with, and they're very passionate, and they're auctioning off a Yeti cooler out there, and you can buy raffle tickets. So small plug. So check in with that at the table outside. And if anyone's staying for the football game tomorrow, they will be out in the tailgate area for that as well. So we're so grateful for our partners across the state and industry, and for the Wold Foundation and family for working with us to create this conference. We were really humbled and grateful for the attendance that we received. And most of you know, we had to cut off registration. So you guys are the lucky ones. But we have a wonderful lineup, and we do aim for this to be impactful. So think about your questions. And as Dr. Kazuba said, there's pads of paper at your table. If you have a question, write it on there, hold it up, and Dr. Kazuba's students will be delivering those volunteer or voluntold to me. So a little bit of housekeeping. So for our panels, that I will bring you, or I'll bring you the questions. And for everyone in the room, there's a few programs on your table. You can also use the QR code on your table to get to download a copy of the programs for this conference. And I want you to know, we realize we have from 11 to 5 a conference, and then we have a reception after that. We cannot cover everything related to Wyoming's energy sector in that amount of time. We know that. So if you look at the back of their program, you'll see there are other events we're also supporting from the School of Energy Resources. And we have some really great upcoming events that will cover other issues that are really critical to the state of Wyoming. And this is just the first conference between the Wold Foundation and School of Energy Resources. So we will look to continue to explore topics important to the state of Wyoming. So now I would like to welcome to the stage the moderator and panelists for our first panel. Panel number 1 is focused on nuclear opportunities for Wyoming, energy community engagement, and economic development. So this panel will be moderated by Dr. Glenn Morrell, Executive Director of the Wyoming Energy Authority, and the panelists will come up and introduce themselves. And so Dr. Morrell will just say a few words about the Wyoming Energy Authority, a really wonderful partner for the School of Energy Resources, and really important work happening there for the state of Wyoming. So please join me in thanking Dr. Morrell, and let's get this conference started.
Not my first rodeo here. Okay, so thank you. I'd start off by thanking Dr. Krucker and Dr. Kazuba for their introductory comments and remarks. They mentioned partnerships a lot. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Energy Authority, and the Energy Authority has extremely broad mission. It's to secure and sustain the energy economy of Wyoming, which is easy to say and extremely difficult to accomplish, given that the scale and the diversity and the uniqueness of the Wyoming energy economy. And we do that by partnerships. And what's a big lever is that we get to work with tremendous partners like the School of Energy Resources, Wyoming Business Council, the Geological Survey, the Enhanced Recovery Institute. It's a long, long list within the state. Also external partners, and the Idaho National Lab is here today. We have a very close relationship and a developing relationship with them. And it's through partnerships and collaboration where we actually execute on that broad mission, that broad strategy to secure and sustain the energy economy of Wyoming, adopt an all of the above mix, adopt a net zero aspiration, and actually make transition, or rather the better word is transformation of an energy economy for the betterment of our society over time. I'd like to thank you all for coming here today. A lot of really important topics under discussion. The energy economy of its own is a very important topic of discussion for the state And as we see through national and international developments, there's a lot of importance regarding energy security, national security broadly, right? And it starts at a lot of small levels like these discussions here in terms of how do we move forward in a productive manner. So your participation is very welcome. And I'm very much looking forward to moderating this panel, but also receiving questions and insights and discussion from you all. Wearing the wrong glasses. So how are we going to do this? We're going to start off with introductions. We'll go through, you've had my introduction, I'll sit down soon, walk through general sort of introductions for our panelists today. And then we'll shift into a Q&A session where I will ask our panelists to provide insights regarding to specific topics, build up this conversation around this very important topic of nuclear energy in the state. And then we'll open it up to you all. We have hopefully about 15 minutes of questions from the audience. And I'm looking forward to that very much. And then hopefully we'll be in a good position at the end of that to wrap. But in terms of closing remarks, the part of that, my happiness to be here today, happiness to lead this, and it really is pretty much an honor, is that the role of nuclear in Wyoming is a new prospect, but it's very, very important. It's a very important part of our transition or transformation, spearheaded by our partners at TerraPower, and I'm glad that they're here and going to share their insights. But the importance is perhaps not as understood as it really should be. It's not just a reactor. There is so much potential for transformative development of the economy, of societies within the state. And that's what we're here to discuss today. So with that, I'll sit down and hand it over first of all to our good colleague, Chris Levesque.
Thanks a lot, Glenn. It's really a pleasure to be here. Quick intro. Chris Levesque. I'm an engineer who's worked my whole career, about 35 years in nuclear energy. First as a submarine officer in the US Navy, but after I left the Navy, I worked for several large nuclear companies, building reactors and servicing reactors. There's 92 reactors in the US that operate very safely today and provide 20% of our electricity. But 8 years ago, I had a chance to come and join Bill Gates at TerraPower. He's the lead investor and founder. And that journey has involved me doing further work on our reactor called Natrium, which we're now building soon be building in Camera, Wyoming. And look forward to sharing more about that project with you today and telling you more about why we're in Wyoming.
Got it. Hi, everybody. First, thanks very much to our colleagues at SER and the Wolf Foundation for pulling all of this together. It's a great privilege to be here. I had my background has been primarily at the World Bank, where I was involved in finance, most recently as the treasurer before I retired and joined the Rock Creek Group, which is an asset management firm. I've also had a home out here in Wyoming, in Converse County for 30 years at this point. So I have had an opportunity to get to know a lot of the environment, the energy architecture in the state, and all of that. And I'm currently involved as well in a number of projects that continue to be mostly in what I would describe as the global energy transition, whether it's trying to see if we can bring renewable energy to some of the small island developing states, things like that. But I do think, and I'm currently serving on the investment funds committee for the state of Wyoming. So I've had some opportunity to become familiar with the state's finances and all of that. I think suffice to say, I've got my perspective here is that the nuclear opportunity in the state is profound. And I think I also feel that the state is going to need to move quickly to take advantage of the opportunities that it offers. And I think it's important that we see this in the context of this broader energy transition that so many countries are facing. When I think of the numbers of governments in different countries that I've had communications with, they are all facing these challenges. And I think Wyoming is extremely well positioned to make all of this work economically for both the medium and long term.
Hi, I'm Tara Rigetti. I'm a professor in the School of Law, School of Energy Resources, and the Haupt School of Environment and Natural Resources. And I co-direct our Nuclear Energy Research Center with my colleague Caleb Hill, where we are focused on building research capacity on campus around all things nuclear energy and throughout the different applications and fuels. That could be materials and chemistry and siting and social license. As part of that, I've been working for the last 3 years with a collaboration that includes INL and the Wyoming Energy Authority on emerging market analysis. And while, as John and Holly said, Wyoming's not an emerging market for energy in general, it is an emerging market for nuclear. And so we are looking at all aspects of that, and it's been a pleasure. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks to Holly and John over there for having TNC and inviting us here. I am also an engineer. I spent the last decade or so working as a civil engineering consultant in Wyoming, focused on water development and long-range planning, before coming to the Nature Conservancy. For folks who aren't familiar, the Nature Conservancy is one of the biggest conservation organizations in the world, working in over 70 countries in all 50 states, focusing on the ground projects and science-based conservation. And TNC is involved in the energy transformation, as Glenn puts it, because we wanted, or in terms of doing large-scale planning, so nationwide modeling, and work towards how net zero goals can fit with land conservation, all the way down to engaging with local planners and land managers and project developers here in the state of Wyoming. So pretty much at every level, we try to see where we can be helpful. And I think that it's important to note that the Nature Conservancy takes a fairly radical middle approach, where we try to form partnerships and say yes and instead of no to different industries and different projects, and find areas that we can make different partnerships. And that's why we get opportunities like this to sit here and talk to you all today.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm not an engineer. You can't travel far in Wyoming without bumping into a geologist. So here you go. So the first question is to Chris, and I think it's a question that has been asked many times and answered many times, but it still comes up frequently, is with respect to the TerraPower Natrium project and its deployment into camera, why Wyoming?
Thanks, Glenn. Perhaps the best way for me to answer that question is really to kind of tell the story. We've been working on the Natrium technology in various forms for the 14-year history of TerraPower. And 2 years ago, we were selected for a really important program by the Department of Energy. It's called the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. It involved a very large grant to help us with the first of a kind costs of a new reactor. But it also involves demonstrating advanced reactor technology that is frankly being developed around the world. Our global competitors are state-owned entities in China and Russia. And in a industry that we created in the US, we really face some stiff competition. So this important program is really essential to us, because the US hasn't had a lot of success on new nuclear projects, frankly, in the last 30 years. And again, our competitors overseas are doing better than us. So to make it successful, we really needed a backdrop of a great program. And I think ARDP, or the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, is that program. So we had to compete to win the large grant. This first reactor, with all of the back office design work and licensing from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and an investment in the supply chain, it's about a $4 billion investment for plants that in the future we think will cost about $1 billion a copy. But there's a lot of first of a kind costs. There's a big speed bump to doing the first one. And to help with that, the US government is funding 50% of the first project. And we're really grateful for that support. But again, because of what I mentioned about the China-Russia competition, we're competing with state-owned companies who are totally underwriting those, those technology developments. So we won. We won because we had the most ready technology, and because we had a really strong team with Pacific Corp and Bechtel and GE Hitachi. And one of the things that wasn't established yet when we won the competition was what's the site, what's the location of the first reactor. So after winning the grant 2 years ago, we were already working closely with the Pacific Corp, and looked at multiple states to deploy the first Natrium reactor. And it was actually Pacific Corp's recommendation to come to Wyoming. And I still remember the meeting with Gary Hogeveen, the CEO of Pacific Corp, brought me to see Governor Gordon. And we talked about what we were poised to do. And I just remember the openness from day one from the governor. He had made the commitment to net zero and, is all into pursuing, clean technologies like carbon capture, and advanced nuclear was something I could tell he was already thinking about. And he jumped at the opportunity. And since then, I've been coming to Wyoming frequently, and we started the project. I've really grown to appreciate Pacific Corp's initial recommendation, and what I've learned, and as Holly pointed out, Wyoming is an energy state. So for our success on this really challenging project, we needed the technology, we need the investment that we're doing well with as a company, but we really need a community that understands energy. And I've done multiple town hall meetings, in the 4 communities where we considered before we selected Kemmerer. And what I found is, Wyoming really gets energy. If you take the time to meet with people and explain nuclear to them, answer a lot of questions. Nuclear always raises questions. We felt a strong sense of buy-in, and we really feel great support here. And I think Wyoming has a very high energy IQ, and that makes it easier too, because there are folks who try and scare people, right, with new developments. And I think the energy IQ is so high here that Wyoming doesn't get scared by someone suggesting something in a headline. They take the time to understand, and we look forward as we build the first plant to really continuing that relationship with Wyoming. And I think this is, as the governor observed, this is going to be a great opportunity for Wyoming, not just to build one plant, but to build multiple plants and build an energy industry around it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So we're going to change and talk about the nuclear industry in general. And so Wyoming has a long and rich history in terms of uranium production. We actually lead the country when we're the leading state producer in the country when there is Wyoming uranium mining occurring. Unfortunately, there's not a lot going on right now, but with this TerraPower project coming in, the Natrium project being deployed, there's clearly plenty of potential to break out of that somewhat of a commodity curse we've had as a state for many years in terms of potential value chain adds along through the supply chain, through the value chain, and other things. We'll spend a few questions now exploring that. I'm going to go back to you, Chris. So if you look at now, you're becoming very informed about how Wyoming works. You mentioned that energy DNA that we have. I'd be very curious to know, in terms of nuclear industry economic development, nuclear industry energy strategy, where do you think the state should be focused, or what areas do you think we should really be taking a closer look at?
Sure, Glenn. The first thing I'll say about nuclear energy, and it's kind of a frustrating thing about nuclear, that this industry I've spent 35 years in, is it's slow moving. The projects take years, not months. And maybe the silver lining of that is great of an opportunity as this is for Wyoming. Like, you have time to figure out your role. And just, as someone who's spent their career in the industry, when I look at Wyoming has going for it, and when I look at other nuclear projects over the last decades in the US and other countries like Finland, where I spent some time, I think there's obvious areas where Wyoming can invest, and not just money, but invest their time and talent in. And it begins with where we sit today at the university. Soon after our announcement, I met with Holly and President Seidel. President Seidel has a pretty good background in nuclear energy. He's super excited about this. I think there's going to be an opportunity for a lot of technical jobs. In the town hall meetings I mentioned I attended, I heard about the brain drain. I heard about University of Wyoming having a really solid engineering school, and most people, or I shouldn't say most, but some people leaving the state instead of staying in Wyoming. I think, advanced nuclear energy can be an opportunity to create good jobs in the state. We need engineering jobs. There's a shortage of engineering talent on these projects. And I should mention, I'm an engineer, but I am not a nuclear engineer. That the Navy taught me about nuclear. So to build a nuclear power plant, you need a lot of civil engineers, mechanical, you name it. We also need a lot of skills coming from the community colleges, welding, mechanics, electricians, you name it. So other opportunities, though, as a reactor designer, I'm not an expert on the uranium and front end fuel business, but because I've been in Wyoming, been learning a lot more about it, and I think there's a great opportunity for Wyoming to participate there. I know there's been cost challenges with Wyoming uranium in the past, but I think the Russian attack on Ukraine has really demonstrated that countries need to think about, where does our fuel come from? Who owns the fuel supply? Who owns our mineral supply? And I'll tell you, people like Senator Barrasso really get this, and I know he's working hard to help the uranium mining industry be more part of the game, and I'm sure that's going to happen. From my work on other projects, things I see in Wyoming is there's fabrication capabilities here. There's a little bit of impatience now about like, hey, where's the procurement tenders? Those are coming. And the reason we're waiting is we're working on an EPC project. They call it engineering, procurement, construction. The E has to come first. So we have 800 engineers working on Natrium design right now, which will lead to component specifications. And there's people, I met with Ken Wandler not long ago. He was asking me Mike Wandler, I should say, was asking me for advice on fabrication. And, he was all ears on strategies for, not just his company, but Wyoming in general. And I think for fabrication, there's going to be non-nuclear opportunities because lots of our plant is actually built to non-nuclear standards. So that's an immediate opportunity for Wyoming manufacturing. And then as Wyoming leans into it more, I think they can get involved with nuclear manufacturing as well, which often requires, investing in a quality assurance program that the NRC approves. But as I began the whole talk, there's time. Nuclear kind of moves slow, frustratingly too slow sometimes. But we're going to move as fast as we can here, and I look forward not just to building this first plant here, but to meeting, the governor's original vision was to help Wyoming be part of, becoming part of this advanced nuclear energy development.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to move to Ken. And Ken, given your background and experience with World Bank and large scale economic development and diversification and so on, can you discuss the potential for development of a full nuclear industry in the state and some of the different components of the value chain opportunity?
Yeah, and I think Chris obviously has covered a huge amount of this. I think I would just on one point he made, which is that obviously in the international context, a huge amount of the competition is state-owned enterprise, which has I think we've saw the results of a lot of this over with the phase down, if I can use that phrase, of Wyoming's uranium industry years ago, in part because of all the state-owned enterprise that was subsidizing fuel production and things in the stands and in the Soviet Union and then Russia. And I think we obviously have to be aware of that, but we have to make some tough decisions about how the policy environment in which all of this is operating. Ukraine has obviously made that visible. But just to very simply, if you think about it, the state is almost uniquely positioned. We've got the uranium resource. We have got the coal-fired power plants due to be decommissioned with the associated transmission, servicing a quite large and well-established set of public utilities. We have as a consequence of that, we have the proverbial brownfield sites for a lot of this development so that it minimizes some of the potential siting difficulties. And of course, along those lines, we do have a very business-friendly environment here in the state. I think also we're seeing recently that the state has committed to what I would call some energy intensive economic development in respect of data centers and crypto and things of that kind. And if you match that up with some of the new developments in micronuclear, you can begin to see opportunities that for these kinds of self-sustaining distributed generation opportunities. And then, of course, the topic that nobody really likes to talk about much is what about spent fuel? I think the state has had a big discussion about that over the years. But I think for what I understand from geologist friends is that the good news is that there are some very stable geologies in the state. Leave aside that no one is really keen to invite everyone else's spent fuel into the state. But certainly for what we're talking about here, I think there's already been some significant work done to look and see where we could provide for long-term stable underground storage without creating and hopefully without creating the tremendous debates that inevitably occur. On the point about I had made in my remarks the comment that I think there is some urgency to this, and I'll tell you why. If I look, I mentioned the public utilities, but if I look at their integrated resource plans and so forth, and the speed with which they are implementing their existing IRPs, you can begin to ask yourself, is there really going to be the unutilized transmission capacity or the available transmission capacity after they have finished building out the wind and solar projects for which they're offering RFPs as we speak. And also looking at some of the other aspects of those IRPs, for example, major new pumped hydro storage projects, which are meant to feed into that transmission system. So I think there is a question we need to ask, which is, is it time perhaps to say, look, let's hold our horses here, because for the state, medium and long term, a build out of the vertically integrated, modern, advanced nuclear capacity could be significantly better for the state's long-term economic well-being. So let me just stop there, but I think those are some of the considerations that I think the state needs to look at carefully.
Thanks, Ken. Over to you, Tara. So we talked about energy DNA and the acceptance of different energy types in Wyoming, which translates into this whole social license issue and the acceptance of various energy types. So, Tara, would you discuss aspects of that general social license as it pertains to nuclear, how it works in Wyoming, how it continues to evolve, and also sort of a double whammy question, but given your current role, how does research in terms of the policy and regulatory environment affect that and hopefully ultimately result in this economic development that we're pursuing?
Yeah, thanks. So I think there's only so much that Wyoming from a policy and regulatory standpoint can do by itself. And so part of what we've been trying to do is unpack the federalism landscape that exists here, and NRC has a really big role in that. And so working with Professor Koski, who I see over there, and students, we've been looking at who is on first for some of these siting decisions. How can we work better together? Are there opportunities to streamline and coordinate better the legal licensing processes? But I think if you look at the energy landscape today, you'll note that federal siting authority by itself doesn't guarantee that you get projects built. We're seeing community opposition to natural gas pipelines, to oil pipelines, to installations in renewable energy across the spectrum. So we're also looking at what's needed to create a social license. And I've been working with Temple and Rachel and Selena, who are doing amazing on the ground research to understand the appropriateness factor of energy decisions and how to work together with communities. I think part of what that means is moving beyond, like Chris said, looking at energy just as something that we want to be cheap and thinking about energy that's high value. And high value energy is energy that meets our energy security needs, it meets reliability needs, and within communities, it meets economic development needs and job needs, and it fits just like we need geologic suitability, we need cultural suitability and geographic suitability. And this is something that comes from working together and building an ongoing relationship. It's not a binary one-time determination of yes or no, like do you accept or reject a project, but more about figuring out how do we work together over the lifetime of a project to realize and continue building these opportunities. It's something Wyoming has done historically really well and has an opportunity to continue to do well in the context of these new technologies. We've already seen coordination with communities. We're seeing coordination with the legislature to solve problems and take a solutions-minded approach. And so building a consensus about how we want to solve these problems and who we want to be around energy is going to allow us to realize the economic development potential that exists around nuclear in Wyoming.
Great, thank you. And last on this topic, Justin. So what is TNC's view of the economic benefits of nuclear, and what, if any, are there special environmental considerations associated with it?
Thanks, Lynn. And I'm going to do my best not to restate too much that has already been said, because I think a lot of this has already been covered quite well. But TNC at a national level sees, and I guess I would say, let me start at a Wyoming level, sees nuclear as a high value sector that can provide Wyoming with a more resilient and diversified economy. That's the broadest scope there. And I think that's obvious why that's really high value here. From a national level, Wyoming or TNC also supports innovative energy developments like nuclear, and then especially like small modular or the Nature facility here in Wyoming that can provide new services and better services than we're getting currently. When we think about Wyoming, we're also thinking about our responsiveness to customers. Holly pointed out that we export over 90% of our energy products in the state. And so a lot of those customers are demanding low to no carbon products, and the development of nuclear in the state allows us to provide that service for them. It also allows us to build out the other types of energy technologies that can piggyback on the grid and build out and decarbonize the grid faster, get towards closer to net zero faster. And then, like everyone else pointed out, high employment, high value energy resources. So that at a broader scale is where TNC sees the value of nuclear for these things. And there's also, it can provides that service towards a baseload power that may be needed really long term, given the state of other energy technologies that provide that baseload no carbon power. Shifting towards the environmental risks, we talked a little bit about, or everyone else here has talked a little bit about the mining and the milling and the value added products that we can provide in Wyoming because of our uranium resource in the state. And I think that that's a really valuable part of the economic narrative and the economic diversification that the state can pursue. But it also has a long history in the West. There's been uranium booms before, and a lot of those sites were operated by small operators who didn't necessarily have the reclamation plans in place they needed to. And if you look across the West, there are a lot of sites that are now taxpayer funded in their reclamation and have some serious problems about how long those and how resilient those facilities are that are being reclaimed and held for centuries. For instance, the Riverton site in Wyoming, which is a DOE managed site, is a uranium mill site that has groundwater and soil contamination. The soil contamination has been sequestered elsewhere, but for at minimum decades, that site is going to be managed and watched by the DOE for groundwater contamination. And it's important, I would say, that the burdens of environmental degradation that are inherent in extractive industries not be placed disproportionately on low income or historically disenfranchised communities, as has happened in the past. So that's an important part. The other piece that we would think about is that these large projects in rural communities are really, really impactful. And when we talk about thousands of new workers coming to communities that are only a few thousand people in size and don't have a large amount of infrastructure or housing or the services to provide to those workers that can keep everyone safe, law enforcement, fire services. Those are really important things to consider. And it's important that the Industrial Siting Council and that process be respected and be engaged as much as possible so that they can account for these issues. And then I think Ken also talked about the long-term storage of spent fuels is a big piece, but not to dwell on that there. I don't think we're going to solve that this hour.
Well, why not? So thank you, guys. So we're going to change a little bit in terms of theme. Talked about social license, talked about acceptance, and then a lot of that is preserved and enhanced through a considerable amount of community engagement. So change gears a little bit here. And over to you, Chris. How is TerraPower engaging in the local community, the state level, regional level, national level, maybe even international level in terms of engagement as you move forward on this nation project?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. You know, I gave you a sense earlier on of when we were talking to multiple communities about the project, but after we selected Kemmerer, it required us to get down into more detail with them on, you know, how do they prepare for construction? Fortunately, the large wave of construction won't start until 2024 or so, and at its peak, we'll reach 2,000 construction workers on site in a community of 2,700. So that's quite a strain there. But that's just at the peak. All right. And I think, Wyoming has a lot of great experience with mobilizing big projects. And there's other examples to turn to. And it all comes down to planning and communication. So we've had multiple meetings in Kemmerer. I'll be there again in about 3 weeks, I think, for a public meeting. And we've brought in emergency response people, waterworks people, sewage, hospital, and our construction partner Bechtel, who has the details on the quarter by quarter expectations of how many people will be coming into the community to work. With that kind of communication, which is only intensifying, I really think the community can be ready. And what does being ready mean? It means things like needing housing, short-term and long-term housing, possibly some transportation upgrades. Glenn, you asked, what are we doing at the federal level? Maybe I'll tell you that because of some missteps with working with coal communities in the past, the Biden administration is like super into how do we make these projects be successful. So, I attended a meeting with Secretary Granholm and Secretary Raimondo, so it's Energy and Commerce. And it was all about, hey, we have this great program that I told you about earlier. How do we make the communities that are supporting these programs successful? And as much grant money as was available in the project I told you about, there's additional grant money available to help Kemmerer be ready with transportation upgrades and those kind of things. And we're giving the best advice we can on grant writing, and we can see the kind of the uptick in that activity. But we're also hearing about, and I'm learning, Wyoming is a hugely self-reliant state. And I'm also hearing about when local business people see the opportunity and understand it and can prepare for it. I'm also seeing that this isn't just a federal and state grant thing. This is driving local investment too, and I think that's going to continue. And like I said, we look forward to not just successfully building a really safe plant and more plants after that, but really look forward to communicating with the state, interfacing at the federal level, maybe to help with some of these grants, and giving the state our best advice on, how to be successful with us and how to create a long-term opportunity here after that first plan is online.
Yeah, thanks. Ken, again, drawing on your experience at the World Bank and elsewhere, what can you tell us about best practices with respect to community engagement? And is there anything that we should be doing better?
Look, I think Chris has gotten at the heart of this. I think it is so important that there be direct on the ground communication with folks in affected communities, and to do that as in a way that encourages and invites their participation, makes it easy for them to participate, and then in effect, I guess the way I'd put it is that you want the members of the public in these affected areas to be inside the tent looking out, not outside the tent looking in. And so they need to feel that they've got a connection with the businesses that are working on all of this. I had seen that in countries that I had worked in during my period at the bank, but I've also seen it here in Wyoming, working in some of the communities that we've had to work with in connection with energy development in different contexts. And I do think that's I really think it's a crucial piece of it to get that done. So I was glad to hear from Chris that, that the TerraPower folks are making this point.
Okay, Tara, in your first set of answers, you mentioned consensus a few times, and there's this thing called consensus-based siting. Could you describe your research on that topic and perhaps start by explaining or defining what it actually means?
Okay, yeah, this is on. So I think we are moving between a time when a lot of energy siting was based on who owned the property. And the person who owned the property had really strong rights to do what they wanted with it. And there wasn't a lot of talk about how that affected the interests of people around them or the powers of the communities in which those properties were located. But I think everyone in this room knows that that's changing. Consensus, though, doesn't mean sort of unilateral or absolute acceptance by everybody, but it means getting all of the people who need to be, as Ken said, in the tent together and taking a broad look at the different stakeholders that exist, both within the affected community, but also realizing that that goes well beyond the city or the county, and identifying those stakeholders and finding a zone of agreement and common interest to move forward together. Through NERC, one of the things that I get to do is support and identify people who are doing really great work on campus. And so that project is actually being led through an environmental justice grant that was granted by through the NEAP program, and it's being led by Dr. Boodali in the Haub School and by Temple Stollinger. So I'm really lucky to work with them. And part of what we're trying to do is learn from communities about their experiences. Wyoming, as sort of the first newcomer state and community to host a Natrium project or an advanced reactor project, has an opportunity for learning around what's working, what the experience of these communities are. And that can create a template that can be used elsewhere around building social license, around getting consensus for projects that are necessary for advanced energy to meet decarbonization goals, and that are going to have implications in a broad range of sectors.
Great, thank you. Justin, the TNC has a long history and is heavily engaged in citing aspects and issues and even repurposing and things like that. So what are the most important considerations for the TNC for citing, and how does TNC engage at these issues at various levels?
Thanks, Glenn. So when TNC thinks about energy siting, we think about the mitigation hierarchy, which is probably familiar to some folks in this room, but the mitigation hierarchy consists of a few different levels, and it's avoidance, minimization, and then mitigation. And so primarily you take a project from the very beginning and look at impacts that can be avoided. Are there ways of moving a project on the landscape, reducing footprint, changing the scope of the project that can reduce the impacts to the environment, to communities, et cetera. Then you look at where you can minimize it. So what best practices are in existence that can minimize that? It might be changing construction times, whether that's during the year or during the day, paint schemes on buildings, noise impacts to animals and things like that. There's a whole bunch of different best practices that you can do for minimizing impacts. And finally, for the impacts that are just entrenched and impossible to avoid, then you look at ways to mitigate them through compensatory offsets or other measures and restoring the project in the end. So that's kind of the overall structure that TNC looks at a larger level. When we think about Wyoming specific impacts, cultural resources, community impacts, and then the familiar environmental concerns and conservation concerns like riparian zones that are so crucial in this state, migrations, whether that's migratory birds or ungulates, and then keystone species like the sage grouse and vulnerable species. So those are all known and acknowledged to folks in the state, but and project developers especially, who have to deal with them all the time. But they're pretty hard to quantify a lot of times, the benefits or even the impacts, and the data isn't always super available. So TNC believes that by weighting or quantifying the low impact or the value of low impact siting and raising that up to make it more available and making it more accessible to project developers, we can reduce impacts and put more of those impacts into that avoided area. TNC doesn't engage too much on individual projects, but we do focus on engaging with stakeholders, policymakers, and community leaders to create a structure where good projects are incentivized, community concerns are held in the forefront, and environmental protections are robust but fair.
Okay, so the last question is fairly open to anybody who wants to answer it, but we appreciate that there's so many students in the audience today who are looking towards their career once they move outside of the university, but also in some of these impacted communities within Wyoming, there are some younger and maybe not so younger adults who are looking to develop their career for other reasons. So the question is really, what would you advise or what would you tell some of these individuals with respect to their education and retraining with looking forward to a career in the nuclear industry?
Okay, I'll start since I'm on campus. And I think I'd start by saying to think expansively about what it means to be in the nuclear industry. Despite being surrounded by engineers and geologists, I think there's room for a lot of different capabilities and backgrounds in nuclear. And it's not just engineering and it's not just STEM fields. It includes people in the social sciences, in finance, and doing all sorts of different types of jobs. And so thinking retraining about what you like doing, what you do best, and then finding the place where that fits into a very broad energy that goes well beyond generation, and all of the different things that are necessary to make energy development, fuel development possible.
So maybe I'll just reflect on how much I learned from young engineers every day. You know, when I started out in engineering, it was a job. You know, I think I chose my major because I wanted a good paying job. And we didn't think about things like Justin just described of, you know, what's the global impact of our work. But I'll tell you, I'm reminded every day by our young engineers at TerraPower. A lot of them, you know, pretty liberal folks who you wouldn't have often thought about supporting nuclear energy. They're working in advanced nuclear energy because they want to save the world. They know we have not enough energy. They know we want to mitigate the climate. So this slow moving industry I told you about, I have all these young people saying, we have to go faster, we have to go faster. And they're asking not just about the engineering, they're asking about all the things that Justin just described. You know, how can we do this right and feel good about it? So, you know, for the folks here at UW, I know I have a sense of that's how you think too. And with advanced nuclear, there's a big environmental justice movement within the industry, not just to do it right and safely, but also, you know, to think about how we, you know, create long-term success for the communities we're working with and for disadvantaged communities who oftentimes got left behind on some of these great developments over history.
Well, that covers exactly what I was thinking, particularly the point about the fact that most of the young people that I speak with also want to ensure that the work they are doing is going to have the positive effect long term. And I think to the extent that the industry can as actively position itself so that that becomes visible and those opportunities are clear to people, I think it can be a big attractant for young talent.
And just to talk about what Tara was saying, but that being interdisciplinary and the scope of opportunities that are around nuclear and around in Wyoming's now diversifying economy is so broad. I mean, I originally came to the state as a mining engineer for Peabody Coal, and wandered in the wilderness for a while, came back to work for civil engineering consulting, and now I work back in energy. And I actually meet with some folks on mining about how we can reuse mining lands and help them save money and reuse these sites. So it's a very broad, and you never know where you're going to end up and what things are going to be there. And so Wyoming just has a ton of opportunity, and it's a great place to be working right now.
Great. So now to the public questions, and there are a ton of really good questions. So I'm not actually sure where to start. I'm going to start with you, Justin. Congratulations. So really good one here. So you said that the TNC has a yes, but approach to development. So how do you engage with citizens who are skeptical or antagonistic towards developing nuclear energy?
It's yes and. But yeah, I mean, I think that when you're engaging with folks who are skeptical about new technologies or old technologies that have historically been saddled with baggage from past events or other things like that, you want to respect them, you want to engage with them and see where they're at, and you want to meet with them and understand their concerns and why they have them. And I think that there's some pretty valid concerns if you're looking at things out of context and not having a full understanding of the nuclear industry. If it's a safety concern, then there's some very clear things you can point to. I'm sure Chris has far better statistics than I do with that, but I guess you want to start meeting that person where they're at. You want to form a story that helps that person understand why this technology might be useful, what it can do for the state. And then you show how that's going to be advantageous to that person and to the things that you share with them. Like, how is that going to help the hobbies and the lifestyle that you appreciate in Wyoming, and create this narrative that brings you both along together. And to nuclear in particular, I think that that's one of the safest forms of energy generation around. And that it has some real advantages towards getting towards net zero goals and things like that. So there are a lot of ways we can engage there, but you got to meet people where they are, and you got to start slow, and yeah, just respect all points of view.
Okay, great. Chris, I have about 47 questions for you here. So so I'll do it maybe a double whammy, a triple whammy question. So the first one is around it being a molten salt reactor and maybe the technical challenges that, perhaps the regulatory challenges of moving towards a Gen 4 reactor, I guess, whatever that classification might be. So the regulatory impacts of adopting a new tech. Another question about your fuel source. So where is the fuel going to come from? Which one else should I choose? And what's the ultimate destination of the electricity that's going to be produced? And then I'll take mercy on you, I think, at that point.
Okay, thanks for those questions. First, I think doctors create a lot of confusion when they do your blood work and they talk about your sodium, when they really are talking about your salt intake, right? So it turns out in natrium is like the Latin word for sodium, which is a metal. And we use it in the natrium reactor as a coolant. So today's 92 reactors in the US use water as a coolant, which boils at a pretty low temperature, 100 degrees centigrade, which means that when you operate the reactor, you're above the boiling point, and it means today's reactors are really high pressure systems, which in fact makes them more expensive because you need very heavy pressure vessels, heavy piping, and really heavy civil structures around them. And that's one of the things that makes nuclear more expensive. So natrium is a sodium cooled reactor, meaning it's a liquid metal. Our reactor operates at 500 centigrade. So sorry, I made the switch to centigrade. We had to decide on something, and we went to metric because we plan to deploy these around the world. So natrium operates at 500 degrees, and the boiling temperature of sodium isn't until 900. So that's a great margin for safety. You know, if you have any unexpected events, you're very, very far from boiling. Some of you might remember at Fukushima, they're already talking about boiling, right away, because water, which is your coolant, starts boiling, and when you lose it, you have a big problem. So, but there is salt in natrium as well, and the molten salt we use is not to cool the reactor. We actually use these really large tanks of molten salt to store energy. It's instead of an electrochemical battery, it's a big thermal battery. So, picture like a big fuel tank, big cylinder, and instead of fuel, it has molten salt in it. What we do with the natrium reactor is we heat that salt. And what that lets us do is store the energy. And we then use the molten salt to heat water and boil water. And by having that large thermal battery, what it lets us do is, and this is why Pacific Corp is so interested in us, and other utilities are as well, is we're losing a lot of that great coal generation that runs 24/7, that gives us that steady output. And we're replacing it with a lot of wind and solar, which is intermittent throughout the day. So natrium ends up being a technology that pairs really well with wind and solar that are going up and down throughout the day. And that's why there's super, super interest in it. And a lot of people say, hey, how can you get this first project done faster? The regulation will be overseen by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There will be two big permits we get from them. The first is a construction license that we'll receive in 2025. But we can and will start construction before that on the non-nuclear systems. So some of that construction will start as early as next year. The next license we get from the NRC will be the operating license. So we plan to go online in 2028. And it's a two-step process. Before the NRC lets you start up the reactor, they'll then look for the operating license application. The fuel supply, has been an issue. These reactors, natrium as well as other advanced reactors designs, require a new higher enriched form of fuel called HALEU, high assay low enriched uranium. And sadly, China and Russia have the capability to produce this, but the US doesn't today. And our plan all along in the US was we were going to have to import the first core load. But then there is, good efforts that involve some significant US funding to create this capability in the US. So following the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians, who were going to be providing this fuel, within days after the invasion, TerraPower said, no, we're not using Russian fuel on the Naughton plant. But okay, then where is it coming from? So our partner, Department of Energy, we're talking to them in earnest right now at the highest levels about for those first core loads, instead of enriching uranium to get to the 19% enrichment we need, there's existing stocks of high enriched uranium in the country that we can downblend to get to the 19% fuel. So for the first core load or two for Naughton, that will be how we do it. But then the great thing, and this was even backed up by the Inflation Reduction Act, there's going to be some really strong investment in the fuel supply chain that could potentially I think benefit Wyoming mining as well. And that's the long-term solution for our fuel supply. Oh, and where does the electricity go? Pacific Corp's not here to explain it, but they have a great distribution, a great transmission network in the mountain region that lets them provide reliable, cheap power to Wyoming, to Utah, and it also lets them participate in exporting electricity to, to California, who, doesn't generate a lot of their own electricity. And, that helps them, kind of offset costs that help provide Wyoming electricity at even cheaper rates. So, our electrons will be, traveling, all over the national grid.
Thank you. And Tara, a question for you. You recently completed a Fulbright Scholar Sabbatical in France. Lucky. There goes my New Zealand accent, France, which has been successful. France, of course, has a very long history with nuclear and hosting nuclear power safely and with public support for decades. What did you learn from them, from that experience, that you could translate to Wyoming?
So I went to France to look at transformation of energy systems in coal producing regions. And the same changes that made Wyoming coal so profitable in the 1980s in terms of access to global markets, surface resources that could be mined with large equipment, led to the closure of the underground coal mines in France after 300 years of mining from the Industrial Revolution. And one of the things I learned while I was there, I lived about the distance from Laramie to Cheyenne, from one of the largest nuclear power plants in Europe, is that understanding and familiarity and comfort with energy is so contextual. When you speak with French people about nuclear energy, about reprocessing, about generation, there's almost like a shrug, like, and so it's so integrated into their culture and energy IQ that it's not controversial. But when I talk to people about living Wyoming, their jaws drop and they say, wait, you live near fracking? Because fracking, of course, has been banned in France and hasn't ever been implemented there. And there is a tremendous amount of fear and discomfort with that technology. Similarly, working on projects that are just starting for onshore CCUS, which again is an area that traditionally people have been very uncomfortable with in France. But things that to us seem kind of like part of our blood seem very scary there. And the opposite is true with nuclear, is that because that's been a part of the energy system for decades, there's comfort and familiarity. It's understood to be essential to prosperity, to energy security, to grid reliability, and as part of the public service of providing energy to everybody within the country. And so I think the main thing it showed me is that how possible it is to create appropriate energy through education and through outreach, and that the more familiarity we have and the more experience we have in nuclear, the more it will become integrated into Wyoming's energy DNA.
Okay, just looking for the hook. Yeah, I think we're out of time. So thank you everyone on the panel for your contributions this morning. It's a tremendous. I thank the audience. There was a stack of questions and they're all really good. And I'm sorry that I didn't have time to go through them all. I don't have permission to do this, but I'm going to invite you all to come up and ask more questions of our panelists during the breaks. That's why they're here. That's why I'm here, is to try and educate and inform as best we can. Big thank you to the School of Energy Resources for inviting me here to do this, take this moderation role, and for putting this together, and a very sincere thank you to the Wald Foundation and the Wald family for their support moving forward. So that concludes this panel, and thank you all again.
Just if I may, one more thank you. I just wanted to, I want to thank Glenn and Holly and colleagues in Randall Luthi in the governor's office, because they are engaging in an intensive and comprehensive look at the nuclear strategy for the state. And I think this is very important. So I just wanted, as a person with my 30 years in Converse County, thank you very much for pulling that together.
Okay. Thanks so much to our first panel. Hope you really enjoy that. There was a stack of questions, which is great. We couldn't get to all of them. The good news is we do now have networking break and lunch. And by the way, our dear colleague, Professor Tara Rigetti forgot in her introduction to mention one more thing. And so recently she was named the Occidental Chair in Energy and Environmental Policies. So yet another distinguished item to add to her resume. So thank you so much for everyone and congratulations on that award. So we now have a 30-minute networking break and lunch I believe is in the hallway. And we will convene at 12:45 back in your seats. And we will at that time hear from Mr. Peter Wold, who's the owner of Wold Oil Properties and board member of the Wold Foundation. And he will be introducing Governor Gordon for our keynote speech. So please get up, network, see the student posters, bid raffles on the cooler, and enjoy yourself, ask questions, and we'll be back here at 12:45. Thank you.